Sarsoa's Calamity, an RPT written audio short story. Elizabeth and Harold stood in front of the Sarsoans. Shayleth later joined Elizabeth a couple minutes after the ceremony began. Bulgo squeezed between them to get a front row view, since no one would hold him up. Elizabeth was confused. She asked her father if this was normally how the ceremony went, but was ignored as Harold grew more agitated by this poor excuse of a priest. She turned to her right, only to see Shayleth and Bulgo speak a different language. Annoyed, Elizabeth could not understand what they are talking about. It must have been a secret, and Elizabeth disliked secrets kept from her. She wished to learn their dialect and be part of the conversation with her friend. Elizabeth then looked to her left. Volley stood on the other side of the crowd quietly to himself as everyone avoided him. Elizabeth recalled Shayleth's advice and moved to him. "Hello, Sir Volley, how are you okay?" Elizabeth stared up towards the giant Voltgar. "Miss Elizabeth, I'm fine but at a loss," as Volley grinned and gave a slight chuckle. "Most of your country's religions are odd to me. My people would mock these ceremonies." Volley paused for a moment. "Elizabeth, I'm sorry about the other night. I was blinded by anger and grief. I can't thank you enough for doing your best to care for him." Elizabeth took a deep breath of relief and looked towards Shayleth, as she knew her ego would grow from her being right. Elizabeth accepted his apology and held his hand. Was this how to comfort a Voltgaran? He seemed to not mind as he allowed Elizabeth to hold his hand. Before Elizabeth could reply back, she gasped at what she believed to be the impossible. Brant was moving. The peasants cowered from the sight. The elder pleaded the onlookers to remain calm, but to no success. The priest waved his acolytes away from the body, which they obeyed. Brant gasped for breath 2 seconds at a time. His body twitched uncontrollably as his midsection thrusted up. Brant's head bashed into the altar and broke the boards to create sharp edges. It scratched the side of Brant's face each time his head slammed down. Then his body moved to the left. His ear speared into the pointed tip of the broken board. The more the body moved, the further the piece of wood lodged deeper into his head. After a few seconds, a crack is heard as his neck broke from his unnatural movement. Blood trickled out of the open wound as it slowly dripped onto the stage itself. His fingers scratched into the altar, ripping out his nails as splinters penetrated his fingertips. Nothing was done to stop him. Volley ran up to save his dead son from mutilating himself further. The acolytes stood in front of Volley to prevent him from disturbing the ceremony. They attempted to slow him down, as he pushed each acolyte aside with ease. Nothing was going to stop him. The priest raised his right hand. His palm face down, he placed it on Brant one last time, and lifted his hand away in a forceful manner, as if it was stuck to Brant's forehead. The last breath was heard, and the body was lifeless no more. Volley kicked each acolyte that held his legs as he stepped up to the altar. The priest gestured with his hands for the acolytes to release him. Volley took off his shirt and placed it over the wound behind Brant's head to prevent further blood spilling on the ground. He freed Brant's head from the broken piece of wood that was lodged in his skull by his unnatural movement moments ago. Volley breathed heavily for a moment as he held his son close one last time. Harold marched towards the priest to face him right in the eyes. He gripped the robes that neared the priest's shoulder and shook him in frustration. "What the hell was that?" Harold demanded the priest to answer. "Unhand me, peasant! He didn't leave!" Harold let go of the priest, only because he knew the punishment by law if he continued to lay hands on a member of a priestly order. "Unknown to me, his soul did not enter the chariot." The priest regained himself. He turned to the horrified crowd. "My greatest apologies to you all," he said in a calm fashion. "His spirit has not left, but do not be alarmed. I will continue this ceremony to ensure You are all protected from the wandering spirits that don't enter Shen's chariot. Elizabeth attempted to pull her father's arm to keep him from the priest. He assured Elizabeth that he wouldn't do anything else. After a moment of conversation between the elder and the priest, Harold informed the Sarsoans that the entourage will return tomorrow to try again. By the order of the priest, Brant was to not be moved from the altar for fear of his spirit being agitated. At this moment, he gave the acolytes permission to bless the food as requested by the priest. 2 acolytes left to watch the cart as the others went to the inn. They prayed and caressed their fingers over the food while the villagers waited in line to feast. Harold reassured Vali at the altar and explained what would happen. This, of course, did not bode well to him, as he was promised to burn his son on a pyre per Voltgaran tradition after the ceremony, but reluctantly agreed. Elizabeth walked to one of the acolytes blessing the bread on the table. She leaned forward to see the face of the acolyte, a man slightly younger than her, smooth face with dirty blonde hair. The acolyte didn't acknowledge her presence. "I hope what happened doesn't discourage you from your holy duty," commented Elizabeth, not to expect a reply. "You must be very strong-minded to stay calm after that." Elizabeth looked away as she reached for the cheese bread. "More than what you can comprehend, my lady." His voice was old, loud in pitch, and deep in tone despite his hoarse whisper. Elizabeth faced the acolyte that spoke and asked what he meant. "I told you not to speak!" The acolyte spoke as if instructed by the priest himself. The priest, who stood next to the cart, yelled to the acolytes to return as they will leave this moment. As they departed, the majority of the Sarsoans began to feast on the blessed food. Elizabeth was hungry and hadn't eaten all day. But did that acolyte sound familiar? Elizabeth looked towards the bread section and, once again, glimpsed at the cheese bread. It was her favorite. Her hands reached for it, but not until Shaleth grabbed a portion of her sleeve and pulled her hand away. Why is she acting so odd? "Trust me as I trust you." Shaleth loosened her grip. "Bolga will make a fresh one for you. I'll make sure you don't pay." Elizabeth agreed to the idea and began to walk inside the inn. As Vali passed, Shaleth asked him to join as she had a fresh hog currently over the fire. Vali agreed, yet could never put together how a Halef knew so much of his ways. Elves hated Voltgar for invading the Nogash Republic before it became a recognized nation. Shaleth guided Vali and Elizabeth as the rest of the Sarsoans feast on the blessed food. Then all entered the inn.